My name is Jonathan Miller, and I'm an old man now, with white hair and hands that shake every time I try to lift my morning coffee. And though my body has weakened, my mind still walks the streets I once patrolled in uniform, flashing through every arrest, every decision, every sleepless night I gave to the city, because when I was young, I was a cop, a damn proud one. And I loved the badge, loved the chase, loved the feeling that I was part of something bigger, that I was protecting the good from the bad. And every day I wore my uniform like armor, believing in justice, waking early, working hard, returning home when the world slept, not once thinking life could be anything else. Until one night, everything changed. And I still remember it like it happened yesterday. Because that night, I met someone I wasn't trained to understand. Someone who didn't fit the mold of right or wrong. A thief, yes, but not like any I'd ever seen. It was cold, a bone-deep cold, and the streets were dead silent. No footsteps, no cars, just wind whispering past empty alleyways. And my partner and I were watching a wealthy house from our cruiser, eyes locked on its dark windows, holding on to a tip we got that she, the infamous thief with no real name, was inside, known for slipping past alarms, outsmarting guards, vanishing like fog at sunrise. And then, just when we thought it was another false lead, the front door creaked and she burst out, dressed in black, body moving like liquid shadow, hair flying behind her. And for a split second she looked at us and smiled. Not scared, not rushing, just aware, like she'd planned it, like she wanted us to chase her, and damn it, I did. I bolted from the car. My partner shouted something and called for backup. But I didn't wait, didn't think, because my heart was pounding with something more than adrenaline. It was instinct. It was obsession. And I ran through the city like a younger version of myself, chasing her through alleys, over fences, down streets so narrow even the moonlight couldn't follow. And no matter how fast I moved, she moved faster, ducking corners, leaping barriers, never stopping, never stumbling, like she knew every brick, every shortcut. And it became less about catching her and more about keeping up, because I'd never felt this before. This pull, this connection, this strange rush of being tested by someone who wasn't running out of fear, but challenging me like she was waiting to see what I'd do when I caught her. And then, finally, in a narrow alley boxed in by high stone walls, she stopped, turned around, and looked at me like she already knew how the story ended. Her breath short, her chest rising, eyes calm like the night sky. And I aimed my gun, standard procedure. But my hands felt wrong, too heavy, too hesitant. And she looked at me and smiled again. That same strange, soft smile that didn't belong to a criminal, and said, "You caught me." Her voice soft but steady. And I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because something in me cracked. Like she wasn't just a thief, but something more. Something I wasn't ready for. And I stood there, gun raised, but unable to move, my chest tight, my breath heavy. And then she took a single step closer and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And that one question hit harder than any punch, because no thief had ever asked me that, not in all my years. And suddenly the badge on my chest felt heavier than my weapon, and I didn't know what to say, didn't know what was right anymore, and the alley went quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. And I looked at her. She looked at me, and something inside me shifted. Because for the first time, I didn't know if arresting her was the right thing to do. Then I heard my radio crackle, my partner's voice sharp in my ear asking, "Did you get her?" And it was my moment to finish it. Call for backup. Bring her in. Do what I always did, But I didn't press the button. I just stood there, frozen, and she saw it in my eyes, that hesitation, that flicker of doubt, and her eyes sparkled with something close to amusement, maybe understanding, maybe something more. And she whispered again, "You don't want to arrest me." And I snapped, "That's not true." But my voice betrayed the war inside me, and she smiled like she knew I was lying to myself, tilted her head and said, "You're different, officer. Most don't think. They just obey. But you're thinking." And her words slipped past my defenses like smoke under a locked door, unsettling something deep. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I had started to question it all. And when she said she stole from the rich to help the poor, I didn't want to believe her. But a part of me, just a small part, did. And when I finally lifted the cuffs, telling myself I was doing the right thing, she moved, not to escape, but to test me one last time, stepping back into the shadows, her figure dissolving into the night. And I stood there watching, not chasing, not calling backup, just letting the moment hang in the air like a decision I didn't know how to live with. And the alley was empty again, just wind and regret. And my partner's voice crackled again. "Did you catch her?" And I stared into the dark, and after a long breath, I pressed the button and said, "No." She got away. I sat alone in my car, staring at the quiet street outside. But my thoughts were far from silent. My body was still, but inside I was unraveling, because I had let her go. A thief, a criminal, someone I was supposed to stop. Someone I should have handcuffed without a second thought. But I didn't. And I didn't know why. And that truth, more than anything, terrified me. Because all my life, I had done the right thing. Followed the rules, caught the bad guys, never questioned the line between right and wrong. But that night with her, something shifted. Something cracked. And now I couldn't stop thinking about her. Her eyes, her voice, that soft, steady smile that felt less like guilt and more like understanding. And my partner beside me kept talking into the radio, pissed off that she escaped. But I barely heard a word, because my mind was still trapped in that alley where she looked me in the eye and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And now, no matter how many reports I filed or criminals I booked, her voice stayed with me, her face haunted my quiet. And when my partner dropped a file on my desk the next morning and said, "Her name's Eva," I opened it and stared down at the woman who had somehow broken through my walls. Eva Morgan, wanted in 3 cities, burglary, high-profile thefts, bank break-ins, but no weapons, no violence, just stealing. And though I closed the file, her eyes followed me for days, her memory living in my thoughts as I walked city streets hoping to catch another glimpse of her, telling myself it was duty, that I had to finish what I started. But deep inside, I knew that was a lie. I wasn't chasing her to arrest her. I was chasing the part of myself that she woke up. And then one ordinary evening, I saw her again, weaving through a crowd on Maple Street like she belonged there. Coat draped loose, hands in pockets. Just another woman in the city. Not a thief. Not a fugitive. And I stood frozen, hand brushing my radio, ready to call it in. But I didn't press the button. I followed her instead, watched her step into a small cafe, like it was any normal day. And I waited outside for a beat, heart pounding. Then walked in, the bell over the door ringing softly. And there she was, sitting at the corner table sipping coffee, calm as ever. And when her eyes met mine, she smiled and said, "Officer, didn't expect to see you so soon." Her voice laced with amusement, like she already knew why I was there. And I sat across from her, unable to look away. And finally, I asked, "Why did I let you go?" Because I needed to know. I needed her to say it out loud. And she leaned back, her gaze steady, and said, "Because I didn't run, and because you had a choice, and you made it." And those words hit me like a punch to the chest, because they were true. And worse, they made sense. And though I should have cuffed her right then, I didn't. I stayed there across from her, in a quiet cafe surrounded by the soft clatter of dishes and the low hum of people. And I listened, watched, tried to hold on to the version of myself that followed the law. But it was slipping, fading fast. Because the longer I sat with her, the more I realized I didn't want to catch her. I wanted to understand her. And when she said, "You want to know me, that's why you're here," I tried to push back, said, "You're a criminal," tried to summon the edge in my voice, but it wasn't there. And she tilted her head, calmly asked, "Then why haven't you arrested me?" And I had no answer, just silence. And she leaned forward, lowered her voice, and said, "I steal because this world is built for the rich to win and the poor to suffer. I take what they don't deserve and give it to those who never had a chance." And whether it was true or not, I felt her conviction, saw her belief, and I told her, "It's still a crime." And she smiled like she already knew I'd say that and replied, "And yet, you let me walk." And the worst part was, I had. And I was doing it again, sitting there, listening instead of acting. And when the waiter brought me a cup of coffee, I didn't order. She said, "Drink, you look tired." And I did, holding the warmth like it might steady the storm inside me. And when I asked her, "What do you want from me?" she laughed softly and said, "You followed me, remember?" And I realized this wasn't a game I was winning. This was a mirror I couldn't stop looking into. And we sat in silence as the world moved outside, people walking, traffic buzzing. But inside that cafe, time stood still, and I knew I had to decide, walk away or end this now. But I stayed frozen. And when she stood up, placed cash on the table, and looked at me with those unreadable eyes, she said, "You have a decision to make, officer. Catch me, or let me go again." And then she turned and walked out. And I watched her vanish into the crowd without moving a muscle. The warmth of the coffee fading in my palms, the empty chair across from me like a confession. And I knew, again, I had let her go. And this time, I didn't even try to stop her. And though weeks passed, I thought of her every night, telling myself it was over, that I had done my job. But I was lying again, because she had changed something in me I couldn't fix. And then one night, she found me. I was walking home alone after my shift. And there she was in the shadows of an old brick building, waiting. And I said, "You shouldn't be here," voice low, trying to hold on to what little control I had left. But she just smiled and said, "And yet, here I am." And then she stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me, officer, if you had to choose between what is right and what feels right, which would you choose?" And I had no answer, just silence and breath. And she watched me, patiently, like she already knew what I'd do. And when she said, "Come with me," my heart locked up. And I asked, "You want me to walk away from everything?" And she nodded and said, "You don't belong in that world anymore. You already know that." And the truth in her words hit so hard I almost stumbled. And I looked back at the life I'd known, the rules I'd lived by. And then I looked at her, a thief, a criminal, but also the only person who had made me feel awake in years. And as my hands trembled, I stepped forward, and she smiled. And just like that, The man who always followed the rules was gone. I was no longer chasing her. I was walking beside her. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever let someone walk away and still felt them in your soul, then show a little love. Hit that subscribe button and become a part of our journey. Because your one click gives life to every word we share.